In a world filled with wealth, power, and success, Joseph, a sterile millionaire, found himself facing a grim reality. His life was nearing its end, and he had no one to leave his legacy to. Rejecting his doctor's advice to focus on his health, Joseph instead disguised himself as a beggar, determined to find someone worthy of his immense fortune. As days passed, his mission seemed hopeless until a stormy night brought an unexpected twist. A young boy called him Daddy, turning Joseph's world upside down. The boy, Aiden, claimed to be his son, leading Joseph on an emotional journey of discovery, doubt, and finally hope. But the stakes rose higher as Joseph learned not only of Aiden's life-threatening illness but also of a twin sister, Aya, who could be the key to saving him. Torn between life and death, legacy and love, Joseph must make the ultimate sacrifice to save the children he never knew he had. Will he find redemption in time, or will fate take everything from him? If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Joseph, a man whose wealth could buy him anything except the one thing he longed for, a true heir, felt the weight of his years pressing down on him. His life, once driven by the relentless pursuit of success, had lost its luster in the face of an undeniable truth: he was alone, sterile, and running out of time. He stared into the glass of the doctor's office window, barely recognizing the man staring back, a frail figure. His once meticulously groomed hair, now a disheveled gray mess that hung limply over a face etched with deep lines of regret and sorrow. He sat across from his doctor, a man who had been more than just a medical professional, a confidant who had seen him through years of triumphs and failures. But today, the doctor's usual calm demeanor was replaced by a heavy, pained look as he scanned the latest test results. "Joseph," the doctor began, his voice tinged with the weight of the news he was about to deliver, "I must be completely honest with you. Without immediate treatment, you have only a few months left. Even with treatment, the chances of recovery are minimal, practically non-existent. But there is still a chance, however slim." Joseph, however, had already made up his mind. His voice, though steady, carried the weariness of a man who had wrestled with his mortality. "Doctor," he replied, his eyes narrowing as if to shut out the grim reality, "living a few more months or even years without meaning, without purpose, is no life at all. It's a slow death. I don't have time for treatment when there's something far more important I must do. I've accumulated a vast fortune, as you know, but what does it mean if there's no one worthy to inherit it? I need to find someone who will carry on my legacy, someone who will use this wealth to make a difference." The doctor leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. "Joseph, you must prioritize your health. Without it, nothing else matters. You can't spend your last days obsessing over who will inherit your money. You have no children, no family. Your focus should be on your well-being." But Joseph's resolve was unshakable. He shook his head, the burden of his emotions outweighing any logic the doctor could offer. "How can I think of myself when the clock is ticking so loudly in my ears? When I'm gone, all that I've built, all that I've achieved, will be lost unless I find someone to carry it forward. I have no family, no heirs. This is my last chance to give meaning to my life's work." The doctor sighed deeply, knowing that his words were falling on deaf ears. Joseph had already chosen his path, one that diverged from the safe, rational course of medical treatment. "What good is a little more time if I have no one to share it with, no one to pass my legacy on to?" Joseph murmured, almost to himself, "Perhaps, if I disguise myself as a beggar, I can find someone who values me not for my wealth, but for the man I am underneath it all. Someone with a heart pure enough to deserve all that I will leave behind." And with that thought, a plan began to take shape in Joseph's mind, a plan born out of desperation, out of a need to ensure that everything he had ever worked for would not be in vain. Ignoring the doctor's final plea to reconsider, Joseph knew his time was limited. but he was determined to spend whatever was left of it in search of a soul worthy of his life's greatest gift. Joseph's resolve to follow through with his plan did not come without a profound struggle within his soul. Each step he took towards disguising himself as a beggar, every torn piece of clothing he donned, was laced with a deep sense of dread and inner turmoil. He knew his health was failing rapidly, but the fear of departing this world without leaving a lasting mark gnawed at him far more fiercely than any terminal diagnosis ever could. "Joseph, you must prioritize your health," the doctor insisted, his voice thick with concern. "Without it, there will be no legacy left to pass on." But Joseph, his face set in grim determination, replied, "What good is a legacy if there's no one worthy to receive it? My wealth, my accomplishments, they're all meaningless if I leave them to the wrong hands. I need to find someone who can truly appreciate and continue the work I've started." The decision was a gamble, one that might cost him his life, but Joseph was convinced that the choice was between a purposeless extension of his life or finding a true successor who would carry his name and fortune forward. The more he thought about it, the more he believed that a few more years of aimless existence were far less valuable than one final, meaningful act. After leaving the doctor's office, Joseph returned to his mansion, a place filled with luxury yet hollow of true warmth. He prepared himself mentally and physically for the drastic step he was about to take. As he slipped into the tattered, grimy clothes, a sight that would have repulsed him not long ago, he felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. The transformation was more than just physical, it was a plunge into the unknown, a departure from the life he had meticulously built. "Perhaps among those who have little, I will find someone who values everything I've created," he mused, his reflection in the mirror unrecognizable. As he stood on the threshold of his mansion, ready to step into the world as a different man, he whispered to himself, "If this is to be my final act, let it be the one that truly defines my life." Disguised and determined, Joseph ventured into the streets, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. The bustling city, once familiar and navigable, now seemed like an alien landscape as he attempted to blend into the crowd. For days he wandered among the faceless masses, his presence barely acknowledged by those too engrossed in their struggles to notice the once powerful millionaire reduced to rags. Will anyone see past the exterior to understand the value that lies within? He pondered, as he moved invisibly through the throngs of people who paid him no mind. The hours turned into days, and each one felt like a test of his endurance and willpower. The nights were the hardest, bitterly cold, dark, and lonely, amplifying the physical and emotional toll of his illness. Joseph could feel his body weakening, the sickness tightening its grip, yet he refused to give up. He found solace in hidden corners, where he could observe the flow of life around him, searching desperately for a glimmer of compassion, a hint of the kindness he so desperately sought to leave his legacy to. Even here, among those who have almost nothing, finding what I'm looking for seems impossible, he reflected, his hope dimming with each passing day. The relentless indifference of the city and its people weighed heavily on his spirit, challenging the very foundation of his quest. The world seemed vast and uncaring, and Joseph felt his determination waning. Yet, amidst the disillusionment, a small, flickering ember of hope remained, urging him to push forward, to continue his search, believing that somewhere, someone was worthy of the gift he had to give. It was on one of those cold, relentless nights when a fierce storm tore through the city that Joseph's world would change forever. The rain fell in sheets, drenching him to the bone and sending icy shivers through his already exhausted body. Seeking refuge, he huddled under a small awning, watching as the deserted streets flashed with sudden bursts of lightning, the only light in the overwhelming darkness. His thoughts were as turbulent as the weather. He had come so far, risked so much, and yet tonight he felt more vulnerable than ever. As he stood there, trying to find some warmth and comfort in the harsh environment, Joseph noticed a group of young men approaching. Their voices carried through the storm, a harsh contrast to the silence of the empty streets. Laughter sharp, mocking echoed around him, and Joseph's heart sank as he realized they were headed his way. There was something in their demeanor, in the way they moved, that made him uneasy. He could sense the threat, the trouble they were bringing with them. I can't afford to get involved in any altercation, not in my condition, he thought, his pulse quickening as the group drew nearer, their presence ominous and heavy. The young men, clad in thick jackets and caps pulled low over their eyes, circled him, the tension between them palpable. What's an old man like you doing out here in a storm like this? Trying to brave the weather, or just scared out of your mind? One of them sneered, his voice laced with taunting malice. Joseph, fighting to keep his composure despite the fear curling in his chest, responded quietly, "I'm just trying to get through the night, same as anyone else," but his words fell on deaf ears. The youths had already made up their minds. Their intentions were clear in their eyes. This was a game to them, and Joseph was the unwilling participant. Without warning, one of the young men lunged at him, a brutal strike that sent Joseph reeling. The blows rained down mercilessly, each one a harsh reminder of his frailty, his vulnerability. Laughter, cruel, unrestrained, mingled with the storm's fury, creating a nightmarish symphony of violence. Joseph's attempts to shield himself were futile, his age and failing health rendering him defenseless against the onslaught. He collapsed onto the cold, wet pavement, pain searing through his body as the storm seemed to mock his suffering. Why is life so unkind to those who ask for so little? Just a shred of dignity, he thought, as the edges of his vision began to darken, his consciousness slipping away. The young men continued their assault, the brutality of their actions lost on them as they reveled in their power. Joseph's world started to fade, the faces of his attackers blurring as the night closed in around him. But then, through the haze of pain and the roar of the storm, a voice clear, strong, and impossibly young cut through the chaos. "Stop it. Leave my daddy alone." The shout was like a beacon in the darkness, piercing through the laughter and the rain. A small boy appeared, his presence fierce and determined, standing up to the group with a courage that belied his age. The attackers, caught off guard by the sudden intervention, hesitated, their bravado faltering as they exchanged uneasy glances. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the storm itself pausing as if waiting to see what would happen next. Then, murmuring among themselves, the young men backed away, their earlier confidence now shaken by the unexpected confrontation. They retreated into the shadows, disappearing into the night as quickly as they had appeared, leaving Joseph battered and bruised on the cold, unforgiving sidewalk. The rain continued to pour down, a relentless torrent that seemed to mourn for all that had been lost. Yet at that moment, there was a glimmer of something more, a chance, perhaps for redemption, for a legacy to finally take root. Joseph, still reeling from the shock of the attack and the boy's startling words, blinked rapidly, trying to clear the haze clouding his vision. His focus slowly shifted to the young boy now standing resolutely beside him. "Thank you, but why did you call me daddy?" "I can't have children," Joseph stammered, his voice laced with disbelief and an undercurrent of confusion, barely able to grasp the gravity of what he had just heard. His hand trembled as he reluctantly accepted the boy's outstretched one, every inch of his body protesting in pain. The boy, with a determined expression and eyes full of unwavering concern, met his gaze. "I called you Dad because that's who you are. I'm your son. My name is Aiden. My mother told me all about you. Come home with me, and I'll explain everything," he said, his voice steady and sincere. Every step alongside Aiden was a struggle for Joseph, but each moment also brought a new revelation. With each faltering step, he felt the boy's presence as a steadfast support, not just in a physical sense, but emotionally as well. "I'm so exhausted and confused. I need to make sense of what's happening and what this boy just told me. I can't have children. This might be some kind of trick, But why would he help me if he meant to harm me? And why does he resemble me so much? Joseph's thoughts raced as he tried to piece together the unexpected puzzle laid before him. Aiden walked confidently beside him, guiding him through the rain-soaked streets, the downpour relentless against the darkened sky. You must have so many questions. I know this is all confusing, but my mother always told me you were important and that one day I would need to find you. Aiden said, his voice filled with a mix of respect and hope as he looked up at Joseph, his eyes shining with expectation. Joseph absorbed every word, feeling a whirlwind of emotions: astonishment, suspicion, and a faint glimmer of hope. How can this possibly be true when I was never able to have children, he wondered, torn between the desperate desire to believe and the nagging doubts that clawed at his heart. Aiden's presence felt almost surreal, a reminder that even in the bleakest of times, life could still throw unimaginable challenges his way. Eventually, they arrived at a modest, unassuming house. The door creaked open, revealing a warm and inviting interior, a stark contrast to the stormy night outside. Aiden stepped inside first, his voice echoing through the small home as he called out, "Mom, I'm home." "There's someone you need to see." Joseph hesitated at the doorstep, a heavy weight of uncertainty anchoring him in place. Then, a woman emerged from within, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her expression shifted from weariness to sheer disbelief as her eyes landed on him. "Oh, Joseph, it can't be. How did you end up here? What happened to your clothes? What on earth happened to you?" Her voice trembled with shock, and at that moment, Joseph realized, with a jolt of surprise, that he was standing face to face with Lillian, his ex-girlfriend. She looked different, older, more worn, but it was undeniably her. Lillian stared at him, her eyes a mixture of recognition and stunned surprise, emotions flickering across her face faster than Joseph could process. "Lillian, I didn't know you lived here. I had some trouble with some boys a few blocks away, and Aiden helped me. But I'm so confused by all of this," he began, his voice raw and vulnerable under her intense gaze. She shook her head slowly, still grappling with the shock of his sudden reappearance. "I never thought I'd see you again, and now, after all these years, you just show up like this," she finally whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The air between them was thick with tension, and Joseph felt like an intruder in a life he had long since left behind, unsure of where he stood or what awaited him in this strange, familiar world. "Aiden found me," Joseph murmured, his voice barely audible as the weight of the situation began to press down on him. He could hardly believe the words coming out of his mouth. "He says he's my son. But Lillian, you know that I'm sterile. I'm sorry, but this boy, he can't be mine." Joseph's words trembled as he spoke, his mind a chaotic storm of disbelief and confusion, struggling to reconcile the impossible with the undeniable reality standing before him. Lillian exhaled deeply, a gesture that spoke volumes about the burden she had carried for so long. She ran her fingers through her hair, a nervous habit Joseph remembered well, trying to find the right words to say, to make him understand. "Joseph, Aiden is your son," she stated, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "I'm certain of it. Maybe there was a mistake in your diagnosis, or something was overlooked, but I know he's yours. I've always known," she added, her conviction cutting through the fog of Joseph's confusion like a blade. "How can this even be possible?" Joseph stammered, shaking his head in disbelief as the walls of his carefully constructed reality began to crumble around him. "I've undergone countless tests at different labs with different doctors. There's no way Aiden could be mine, no matter how much I might want him to be. I've made peace with the fact that I can't have children." He continued, though his voice wavered, betraying the tiny spark of hope that had somehow ignited in the depths of his heart, a spark he was desperately trying to extinguish before it consumed him entirely. Lillian watched him closely, her eyes filled with a mixture of empathy and determination as she saw the battle raging within him. "Joseph, I'm telling you the truth. You are Aiden's father." I would never lie about something so important. I had to raise Aiden on my own, but he always knew who you were, Lillian began, her voice softening as she stepped closer to Joseph, hoping to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. "When we parted ways, I left the city. It was a dark time for me, and by the time I found out I was pregnant, you had already moved away, and I couldn't reach you. I never imagined I'd see you again," she confessed, her voice tinged with the sadness of years spent in solitude, nurturing a child she believed would never know his father. Joseph felt the enormity of her words settles over him like a suffocating blanket. He was drowning in a sea of emotions, waves of guilt, regret, and disbelief crashing over him, pulling him under. "I should have looked for you," he admitted, his voice thick with sorrow and self-reproach. "But I thought it would be better this way, that you had moved on and forgotten about me, that it was what you wanted. I didn't want to drag you back into my mess of a life," he continued, his voice breaking as he realized how many years had been lost, how many moments he could never get back. The pain etched on Lillian's face was a reflection of the difficult choices she had been forced to make, and Joseph couldn't help but wonder how many wrong turns he had taken in his own life, how many times he had chosen the path of least resistance, only to find himself alone at the end of it. The truth has a way of coming out, even when we least expect it. Joseph mused silently, the weight of his own words sinking deep into his heart as he realized that he was now standing on the precipice of a second chance, a chance to reclaim a part of his life he had thought lost forever. As they stood there, caught between the unbearable weight of their shared past and the fragile hope of an uncertain future, Aiden remained quietly in the background, his young eyes filled with an understanding far beyond his years. As though he knew that this moment was as much about healing old wounds as it was about creating new beginnings. Joseph, feeling the overwhelming pressure of the situation bearing down on him like a crushing tide, sighed deeply, the sound filled with the exhaustion of a man who had spent far too long running from the shadows of his past. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to meet Aiden's, and in that moment, something inside him shifted, something deep and primal that he couldn't quite name. "I need time to process all of this," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper as he felt the enormity of the situation closing in around him like a vice, tightening with every second that passed. "But I want to understand what happened. I need to know," he added, his eyes pleading with Lillian for answers, for anything that could help him make sense of the chaos swirling around him. Lillian nodded, her tense expression finally softening as she offered him a tentative smile, a small gesture of reassurance amid the storm that had engulfed them both. Though still shaken by Joseph's sudden reappearance in her life, Lillian couldn't deny the undeniable connection that still lingered between them, a connection that had never truly faded, despite the years and the distance that had separated them. The revelation that Aiden was his son hung in the air like a heavy fog, thick and suffocating, creating tension so palpable it felt as though it could shatter with the slightest provocation. Joseph, unable to contain the maelstrom of frustration and confusion boiling inside him, turned back to Lillian with renewed intensity, the raw emotion in his eyes burning with a fire that had long been extinguished. "You should have told me," he exclaimed, his voice rising with each word, the anger and hurt that had been simmering beneath the surface finally boiling over. "How could you keep something like this from me? How could you let me go on believing that I could never be a father, that I was destined to live my life alone?" The shock and pain of the discovery fueled his anger, making it impossible for him to hold back the torrent of emotions that now surged within him, threatening to consume him completely. Lillian, equally overwhelmed, felt her own emotions bubbling to the surface, her voice rising to meet his as the storm of their long-buried feelings finally erupted. "I didn't know how, Joseph," she cried out, her voice cracking under the weight of her guilt and sorrow. "You had vanished from my life, and then there was the information that you were sterile. I didn't think you'd believe me, that you'd even want to believe me." I thought you'd moved on, that you didn't want anything to do with me anymore," her words, charged with years of pent-up frustration and pain, clashed with his in a chaotic symphony of unresolved emotions, each syllable striking like a hammer against the fragile foundation of their past. The room buzzed with the intensity of their confrontation, the air thick with the scent of rain and the raw energy of emotions laid bare, emotions that had been buried for far too long, now unleashed with a force neither of them could control. The long-suppressed feelings of betrayal, regret, and longing filled the space between them, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to find any semblance of calm amid the chaos. But beneath the anger and confusion, beneath the layers of hurt and misunderstanding, there was something else, a glimmer of hope, a faint chance at redemption, a small light at the end of a very long, very dark tunnel. If only they could find a way to navigate the pain of the past and embrace the truth that had finally come to light. It was a chance to heal, to forgive, to start anew, but only if they were willing to take the first step, to reach out across the chasm that had grown between them and find the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. "I could have helped. I could have been there for him," Joseph insisted, his voice tight with anguish. The realization of what he had missed out on, the years, the moments, the chance to be a father was like a knife twisting in his gut. His sense of betrayal was raw and overwhelming, as though a vital piece of his life had been stolen from him without his knowledge or consent. Lillian's eyes, filled with restrained tears, locked onto his. She had anticipated this moment, dreaded it for so long, and now that it was here, it was even more painful than she had imagined. "Do you think it was easy for me, raising Aiden alone, constantly fearing how you would react if you found out?" she shot back, her voice a mix of pain and exhaustion. She was tired of carrying this secret alone, tired of facing Joseph's anger now that everything was out in the open. "I was terrified, Joseph. I thought you had moved on, and I was left to figure it out on my own. There's so much you don't know. You have no idea what I went through," she continued, her voice trembling but unwavering in its determination. But Joseph, still reeling from the revelation, was in no mood to accept her reasons. "You denied me the chance to know him, to meet him, to be his father from the beginning," he accused, his voice heavy with the bitterness of lost time. "And now I'm here, completely blindsided, not knowing what to think or how to deal with any of this." He shook his head, frustration boiling over, spilling out in every word, every gesture. Lillian felt cornered, knowing that the choices she had made, the decisions she had thought were best at the time, were now unraveling in the worst possible way. "I did the best I could with the information I had," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "But I never wanted to take Aiden away from you. I just didn't know how to reach you, how to explain something so complicated, so painful." The tension between them was thick, almost suffocating, as years of pent-up emotions, regrets, and misunderstandings crashed together in an explosive confrontation. Just as Joseph was about to respond, Aiden, who had been silently listening to the exchange, suddenly took a deep breath, his face pale and his body swaying slightly. "Mom, Dad, I don't feel well," he murmured weakly, before collapsing to the floor. The argument screeched to a halt as tangible fear replaced the anger in an instant. Joseph and Lillian stood frozen for a moment, their shock paralyzing them, before the urgency of the situation kicked in. "Aiden," Lillian cried out, her heart seizing in her chest as she dropped to her knees beside her son. Panic flooded her senses, washing away everything else. Joseph, equally alarmed, quickly scooped Aiden up in his arms, his previous frustration and confusion now buried under a wave of fierce determination. "We have to get him to the hospital now," he said urgently, his voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside him. Lillian didn't hesitate. She grabbed her car keys and they rushed out, the argument forgotten as they focused solely on Aiden. Lillian drove like a woman possessed, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel, while Joseph cradled Aiden in the back seat, trying to stay calm even as his mind raced with fear. The ride to the hospital was a blur, each second feeling like an eternity, every red light, every slow car a new source of anxiety. Joseph's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one prayer kept repeating over and over, "Please, God, let him be okay." The emergency had a way of stripping away everything else, uniting them in a shared purpose, saving their son. The fight, the harsh words, the years of unresolved feelings, all of it seemed distant and irrelevant now. There would be time for that later, but right now, nothing mattered more than Aiden's health. At the hospital, the tension was nearly unbearable as they waited for news. The sterile, cold waiting room was filled with the low murmur of other anxious families, but to Joseph and Lillian, the only thing that mattered was the door through which Aiden had been taken. Time seemed to crawl as they waited, every minute stretching out like an hour, the silence heavy with unspoken fears. Lillian and Joseph sat side by side, their earlier argument now a distant memory, both of them focused on the same thought, the desperate hope that Aiden would be okay. In that endless, agonizing wait, they were no longer estranged parents or former lovers. They were simply two people, united in their love and concern for their child. And in that shared silence, amidst the fear and uncertainty, they found a small, fragile thread of connection, a glimmer of hope that perhaps, despite everything, they could find their way through this together. Joseph sat beside Lillian, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, struggling to come to terms with the gravity of the situation. How did everything spiral to this point? Aiden is just a child, and he's already facing such unimaginable trials. Joseph pondered, feeling the crushing weight of the moment. His heart ached with a blend of confusion and sorrow. Lillian, her nerves on edge, fidgeted restlessly beside him. Her hands twisted and turned, her fingers intertwined in a desperate grip, her eyes locked on the door of the emergency room with an almost frantic hope. The minutes stretched painfully as they waited, the only sound the distant hum of hospital activity. The tension in the room was palpable, a heavy silence broken only by the occasional murmur of other anxious families. Finally, the door swung open, and a doctor emerged, his face etched with a deep, serious concern. The gravity in his expression was immediate and unmistakable. Joseph and Lillian sprang to their feet, their faces masks of raw panic and desperation. "Doctor, how is Aiden? Please tell us he's going to be okay." Lillian's voice cracked with anxiety as she clutched at Joseph's arm, her eyes wide and pleading. The doctor paused, his gaze shifting between them as he carefully chose his words. "Aiden has been diagnosed with a rare genetic condition," he began, his voice heavy with empathy. "He experienced a critical episode and requires an urgent transplant to survive." The impact of his words hit Joseph like a physical blow, the reality of the situation sinking in with brutal force. "What can we do? There must be something." Anything. Joseph's voice was laced with a fierce determination, his resolve unshaken despite the severity of the news. Lillian's hand shook uncontrollably as she gripped Joseph's arm, her whole being trembling with fear and hope. "Please, there has to be a way," she insisted, her voice cracking under the strain of her desperation. The doctor's face remained solemn as he shook his head slowly. "We are working quickly to find a compatible donor, but due to the rarity of Aiden's condition, the chances are unfortunately quite complex." His words were a harsh reminder of the limited time they had, each syllable underscoring the critical nature of the situation. Joseph's heart raced with the weight of responsibility, knowing that every moment counted in the fight for Aiden's life. "Is there any possibility that I could be a match?" Joseph asked suddenly, a glimmer of hope sparking in his eyes. The thought had struck him like a lifeline in the sea of despair. Lillian's gaze shifted to him, a mix of surprise and tentative hope flickering across her face. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. "We can certainly test for compatibility," he said, his voice conveying the urgency of the situation. As they awaited the test results, the room seemed to close in around them, the air thick with unspoken fears and the weight of their shared anxiety. The silence was almost tangible, filled with the echoes of their unvoiced worries. Joseph turned to Lillian, his eyes burning with resolve. "We need a plan, something concrete to ensure Aiden gets what he needs," he said, trying to infuse some hope into the overwhelming uncertainty. Lillian nodded, her tears barely held in check as she squeezed Joseph's hand with a desperate grip. "We have to hold on to hope," she said, her voice steadying with a quiet determination. "We'll get through this together." The severity of the doctor's news was a stark reminder of how swiftly life can shift, and the realization of Aiden's struggle was just beginning. After what felt like an eternity, Joseph and Lillian made their way to the laboratory to provide samples for testing. The bustling hospital laboratory was a hive of activity, with doctors and nurses moving swiftly, each carrying critical samples and results. Joseph sat in an uncomfortable chair, his anxiety palpable, as he watched the doctor meticulously analyze the test results. The air was thick with tension, every second stretching into what felt like hours. Finally, the doctor turned to them, his face a canvas of complex emotions. "Mr. Joseph, MS. Lillian," he began, his voice grave but with a note of cautious optimism. "I have the test results. First, the DNA test confirms that Mr. Joseph is indeed Aiden's biological father." Joseph felt a surge of mixed emotions, a tumultuous wave of disbelief and profound awe washing over him. "My God," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "How can this be? How am I worthy of such a profound blessing, a chance to be a father when I thought it was impossible?" His words were choked with the weight of the revelation, and Lillian's eyes met his with a shared sense of wonder and a new, tentative hope. The doctor's words hung heavily in the air, each syllable weighing down on Joseph and Lillian with a crushing finality. Unfortunately, the tests show that Mr. Joseph cannot donate due to his fragile health condition. The risks are too high, it could be fatal for him, and the effort would be in vain, the doctor said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. He paused, allowing the gravity of the situation to fully settle in before continuing. "Your heart condition, exacerbated by recent stress, makes the procedure even riskier." Lillian gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as if to stifle a sob. "What does this mean for Aiden? And for Joseph?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear and confusion. The doctor's expression remained grave. "We need to find another donor for your son urgently. As for Mr. Joseph, he should start treatment as soon as possible." Before either of them could react further, a nurse burst into the room, her face pale with worry. "Doctor, Aiden's condition is deteriorating rapidly. Immediate intervention is needed," the doctor gave them a final, significant look before hurrying away. "I will do everything I can for him, but time is critical," he said urgently. "Please do whatever you can to help him," Lillian pleaded, her eyes brimming with tears. Joseph tried to stand up to follow the doctor, but was suddenly overcome with dizziness. He leaned heavily against the wall, his face pale. Lillian rushed to his side, her fear evident. "Joseph, you need to take care of yourself too. We can't afford to lose both of you," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't think about myself right now, Lillian. Aiden needs us," Joseph insisted, struggling to steady himself. As they watched helplessly, doctors and nurses hurried to Aiden's side, their faces masks of concentration. Lillian's face was a storm of emotions, guilt, fear, and a steely resolve. She turned to Joseph, her eyes red and teary. "Joseph, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Joseph's confusion deepened as he looked at her, his heart pounding with a mix of apprehension and hope. "What is it, Lillian? What could be so crucial now?" Lillian took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "Aiden has a twin sister. Her name is Ilya. I gave her up for adoption when they were born." The revelation hit Joseph like a physical blow, his body swaying slightly as he struggled to process the enormity of Lillian's words. A twin sister. How? Why didn't you tell me? He stammered, his thoughts a chaotic jumble. I was in no position to raise 2 babies. My financial situation was dire. I could barely feed myself, let alone 2 infants. I was desperate and overwhelmed, and I didn't know how to reach out to you or seek your help. I thought that giving 1 baby up for adoption was the best I could do. Lillian explained, her voice thick with anguish and regret. But now, she might be Aiden's only chance. Joseph's mind raced with the implications of this new information. A twin sister could be a perfect match for a transplant, he said, the realization dawning on him. The urgency of their situation was underscored by the sudden blare of alarms from Aiden's room. The corridor filled with the hurried footsteps of medical staff, their expressions tense and focused. Fear gripped Joseph and Lillian as they watched the commotion, knowing that Aiden's condition was worsening and that their time to act was rapidly running out. Joseph's instincts kicked in, his business acumen sharpening amid the chaos. With trembling hands, he grabbed the phone and began making urgent calls, his voice echoing with a frantic urgency that cut through the hospital's clamor. I need all available resources immediately. Locate the adoption agency, search the records, do whatever it takes, he commanded, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. Lillian stood outside Aiden's room, her eyes darting between her unconscious son and Joseph, who was pacing and gesturing wildly on the phone. The hours stretched into an agonizing wait. Joseph had mobilized a team of lawyers, private investigators, and even government contacts to track down Elia. The search effort was relentless and wide-reaching, with people poring over adoption records, questioning agency staff, and pursuing every possible lead. The tension was unbearable as time ticked away. Lillian, exhausted and emotionally drained, could barely keep her eyes open. Joseph's frustration mounted with each passing minute. They knew that every second counted in finding Aiden's twin sister. Each call, each inquiry, was a desperate bid to find the missing piece of the puzzle that could save Aiden's life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Joseph received a call from one of the investigators. "We've found her. Elia is alive and well. She's living in a nearby city," the investigator said, relief evident in his voice. Joseph's heart leaped with a mix of hope and exhaustion. "Get her here as fast as possible," he instructed, his voice resolute. The news was a small glimmer of hope amid the storm of their crisis. As they awaited Elia's arrival, Joseph and Lillian clung to the hope that this last piece of the puzzle would make a difference. Aiden's life hung in the balance, and they faced the agonizing uncertainty of whether their efforts would be enough to save him. The journey ahead was fraught with challenges, but Joseph and Lillian were determined to face them together, driven by the love they both had for Aiden and the newfound hope that his twin sister could provide. Joseph's face was a mask of worry and determination as he ended the call. He turned to Lillian, his expression a mixture of frustration and resolve. "The adoption records are incomplete, and it seems Aya was adopted by a family that moved abroad years ago. We're trying to track down their location, but it's proving to be a complicated task." Lillian's eyes filled with tears, her hope wavering as she clung to Aiden's hand. How are we going to find her if she's so far away? What if it's too late? Joseph squeezed her hand, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "We can't give up. We have to believe that there's still a chance. I'll keep pushing until we find her. We need to use every resource available." The hospital room seemed to close in around them, the beeping of the monitors a constant reminder of the urgency of their situation. Joseph took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "We'll find out where they are. I'll contact every possible agency, every embassy, if necessary. We can't afford to stop now." As the night stretched on, Joseph made more calls, reaching out to international agencies and seeking help from anyone who might have the information they needed. Each call was met with varying degrees of assistance and delays, but Joseph remained relentless, driven by the urgency of Aiden's condition. Lillian, meanwhile, continued her vigil at Aiden's bedside, her whispered words of encouragement mingling with her silent prayers. The exhaustion in her eyes was evident, but she refused to let it overwhelm her. Her focus was solely on her son, her every thought and hope centered on finding Aya in time. Hours later, just as Joseph was beginning to feel the weight of despair creeping in, his phone rang again. He grabbed it immediately, his heart racing as he answered. "Sir, we've made some progress," the voice on the other end said, sounding more hopeful than before. "We've located the family that adopted Aya. They're living in Europe, in a small town. We're working on contacting them directly to confirm if Aya is indeed their daughter." Joseph's heart leaped with cautious hope. "Thank you. Keep me updated. We need to move quickly." He turned to Lillian, his eyes reflecting a glimmer of hope. "We've located Aya's family. They're in Europe, but we're working to confirm if she's there and how we can get in touch with them." Lillian's face showed a mixture of hope and fatigue. "Please, Joseph, let's pray that this is the breakthrough we need." As the day began to break, the tension in the hospital room remained thick. Joseph and Lillian continued their vigil, holding onto the fragile hope that Aya might be their son's salvation. The search was far from over, but the progress was a small, vital step in their desperate quest to save Aiden's life. The next few hours were a blur of activity and anxious waiting. Joseph coordinated with international agencies, ensuring that every possible avenue was explored to expedite the process. Lillian, despite her exhaustion, kept her focus on Aiden, her heart breaking with each passing moment. Finally, as the day wore on, a call came through with the confirmation they had been waiting for. Aya's adoptive family had been contacted and agreed to facilitate the testing to determine compatibility. The news brought a renewed sense of hope, even as the challenges ahead loomed large. Joseph and Lillian embraced, their weary faces reflecting the deep strain of the past hours. "We have a chance," Joseph said, his voice filled with cautious optimism. "We'll keep pushing until we have answers. We're not giving up." Lillian nodded, tears of relief mingling with her exhaustion. "We have to believe in this chance, for Aiden's sake." As they prepared for the next steps, Joseph and Lillian clung to the hope that Aya's potential as a donor would provide the lifeline Aiden so desperately needed. The journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but they faced it with unwavering determination, united in their love for their children and their resolve to overcome the overwhelming odds. Joseph turned to Aiden's doctor, his face a picture of determination and desperation. "Doctor, we have a situation here. Aya, Aiden's twin sister, is also critically ill and needs a transplant. We were hoping that if they could be donors for each other, it might solve the problem. But the Spanish doctor says neither is strong enough at the moment." The doctor, who had been quietly observing the situation, nodded gravely. "I understand the urgency. However, if they are too weak to undergo the procedure safely, we need to explore other options while making sure they receive the best possible care to stabilize their conditions." Joseph's frustration was palpable. "We're running out of time. What other options do we have? Can't we expedite any treatment or find a temporary solution?" The doctor considered Joseph's words. "We can look into experimental treatments or medications that might stabilize their conditions. Additionally, we should prioritize finding other potential donors who match Aiden's condition and keep Aya's situation monitored closely." Lillian, who had been silent and tearful, spoke up with a trembling voice. "What about Aya? Can she receive treatment to improve her condition so she might be a donor later? Or is there something we can do to make sure they both have a chance?" The doctor looked at Lillian with compassion. "We'll need to coordinate closely with the Spanish team. They might have insights into specific treatments for Aya that could improve her condition. In the meantime, I can consult with specialists here about possible treatments for Aiden to keep him stable. Joseph took a deep breath, his mind racing with the urgency of their situation. I want the best possible care for both of them. Please do everything you can to ensure they have a fighting chance. The doctor nodded in agreement. We will do our utmost. I will get in touch with the Spanish team immediately and make arrangements for Aiden's care. As the video conference ended, Joseph and Lillian were left with a sense of fragile hope. They knew the path ahead was fraught with challenges, but they clung to the hope that they might find a solution. Joseph turned to Lillian, trying to offer a reassuring smile despite the heaviness in his heart. We're not out of options yet. We'll keep pushing for solutions and do whatever it takes. Lillian nodded, her expression a mix of exhaustion and hope. We have to keep believing, for Aiden's and Aya's sake. Hours turned into days as Joseph and Lillian navigated the intense emotional and logistical challenges. They worked tirelessly, coordinating between hospitals, specialists, and international agencies. Each day brought new updates and developments, each one filled with a blend of hope and anxiety. Meanwhile, Joseph had managed to secure an emergency treatment for Aiden that could potentially stabilize him while they awaited further news. Lillian, though drained, remained a pillar of strength, holding on to every shred of hope for her children's recovery. As the search for additional donors continued, and with the Spanish team working to stabilize Aya, Joseph and Lillian's fight for their children's lives was far from over. They knew that the path ahead was uncertain, but they faced it with unwavering resolve, united in their love and determination to save Aiden and Aya from the dire circumstances they faced. Joseph and Lillian's days were consumed by a relentless battle against time and uncertainty. Each day brought a new wave of challenges, but their commitment never wavered. Joseph worked closely with Aiden's doctors to monitor his progress and ensure that the emergency treatment was working effectively. He tirelessly followed up on every lead and coordinated with international teams to track down Aya and get the latest updates on her condition. Lillian, despite her exhaustion, remained steadfast. Her days were filled with prayers and quiet moments of reflection as she sought strength to support both her children. She frequently visited Aiden, offering him words of encouragement and trying to stay positive in the face of overwhelming odds. Meanwhile, the Spanish medical team was doing everything in their power to stabilize Aya. They adjusted her treatment plan and closely monitored her condition, hoping to improve her health to the point where she might eventually be a viable donor. The updates were slow, but there was progress. Aya's condition showed signs of slight improvement, a glimmer of hope amid the darkness. Joseph, with his network of contacts, managed to expedite the search for alternative donors. He reached out to various organizations and medical networks, hoping to find a suitable match for Aiden. The pressure was immense, but Joseph's resolve was unwavering. He knew that every second counted. One evening, as Joseph and Lillian sat in the waiting room, the phone rang with news that would change their course. Joseph answered, his heart pounding. "Mr. Joseph, we have some significant news," the voice on the other end said. Joseph's breath caught. "What is it?" "We've identified a potential donor who matches Aiden's needs. The match is not perfect, but it's a viable option. We need to act quickly to proceed with the preparations." Joseph's heart leaped with cautious optimism. "Where is this donor located?" "In our local registry." "The donor is here and ready to proceed," the voice confirmed. Joseph quickly relayed the news to Lillian, whose eyes filled with a mix of relief and continued concern. "There's hope for Aiden. We have a potential match right here." As the preparations for the transplant began, Joseph and Lillian focused on their immediate goal, ensuring that Aiden received the best possible care. They knew that finding a suitable donor for Aya would be their next challenge, but for now they could focus on Aiden's immediate needs. The transplant surgery for Aiden was a complex and delicate procedure, but the medical team was highly skilled and prepared. As they waited for the surgery to conclude, Joseph and Lillian were left in a state of tense anticipation. Hours later, the surgeon emerged with a tired but hopeful expression. Aiden's surgery was successful. The donor's match was good, and we're hopeful for a positive recovery, the surgeon said. Tears of relief streamed down Lillian's face, and Joseph felt a profound sense of gratitude and exhaustion. They knew that Aiden's journey was far from over, but this was a significant step forward. With Aiden's immediate crisis addressed, Joseph and Lillian turned their attention back to Aya. They continued to coordinate with the Spanish team, hoping that Aya's condition would stabilize enough to make her a viable donor for her brother in the future. The days ahead were filled with ongoing treatments, emotional ups and downs, and relentless efforts to secure Aya's future. Joseph and Lillian remained united, their love and determination driving them forward as they faced each new challenge. Their fight was far from over, but with each step, they moved closer to a resolution. Amid their struggles, they found strength in their hope and the unwavering support they provided each other, determined to see their children through the trials they faced. "Mrs. White, I understand your concerns, but this might be Aya's only chance," said the doctor on the other end of the line. The voice of a woman, trembling and scared, responded, "But the trip, it's so risky. What if something happens during the flight?" Joseph could no longer remain silent. "Please, I know you don't know me, that you have no reason to trust me, but I beg you, let me try to save my biological daughter," he pleaded, his voice full of emotion. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, Mrs. White's voice sounded, "All right, I agree with whatever is necessary to save my girl," she replied. With approval obtained, the rescue operation went into action. A medical jet was prepared in record time, equipped with all the necessary equipment to keep Aya stable during the flight. A medical team specializing in the transport of critical patients was mobilized. "I can't waste any more time. I'm going on that flight," Joseph declared, getting up from his hospital bed. Lillian grabbed his arm, alarmed. "Joseph, you can barely stand. How do you expect to survive this trip?" But Joseph was adamant. "I can't ask our daughter to make this trip alone. I need to be there for her," he replied. Against all medical advice, Joseph boarded the jet to fetch his daughter. It felt like an eternity of preparation until Joseph finally saw the medical team bring Aya onto the plane. His heart stopped for a moment. There, fragile and pale on a stretcher, was his daughter, the child he never knew existed until a few days ago. Involuntary tears sprang to his eyes as he absorbed every detail of her face. "Aya," he whispered, the name strange yet familiar on his lips. Despite the tubes and monitors surrounding her, Joseph could see traces of Lillian in her, the shape of her nose, the delicate curve of her cheek. And there, in the determined line of her jaw, he saw himself. A wave of love and protection flooded him, so strong and sudden that it nearly took his breath away. During the flight, Joseph kept his eyes on Aya. He watched the doctors constantly monitor her vital signs, each beep of the monitors echoing in his mind as a cruel reminder of her fragile condition. But amid the fear, there was hope. Every breath Aya took, every heartbeat recorded on the monitors, was proof of her strength. The long hours of flight were an agony of worry and physical discomfort. He watched the doctors constantly monitor Aya's vital signs, each beep of the monitors echoing in his mind. "We're losing altitude," the pilot suddenly shouted, hours after takeoff. "Prepare for an emergency landing." Joseph felt panic rise in his throat. "No, no, no, not now, please God, not now." The jet landed with a violent thud at a small airport. Joseph, ignoring his pain, helped the medical team stabilize Aya. "Hold on, we're almost there," he murmured, holding the hand of the daughter he barely knew. Joseph's first sensation was the stark, sterile chill of the hospital room. As his eyes adjusted to the light, he saw Lillian's tear-streaked face hovering above him, a look of immense relief and weariness. "Joseph," Lillian whispered, her voice trembling. "You made it." Joseph tried to speak, but his throat felt dry and sore. He managed a faint smile, feeling the weight of the past hours slowly lifting. How are the kids?" he croaked. Lillian's eyes welled up again, but this time her tears were mixed with a fragile smile. "They're stable. The surgeries went well. Aiden and Aya are both in recovery." Joseph's heart, though still weak from the ordeal, soared with the news. Despite the exhaustion clawing at him, a sense of profound relief and gratitude washed over him. The battles they had fought were far from over, but the immediate crisis had been met with a glimmer of hope. "You did it," Joseph, Lillian said, her voice filled with admiration. "You saved them." Joseph's gaze softened as he took in Lillian's tearful expression. "We did it," he corrected gently. "We all did." The days following the surgeries were filled with a mix of tension and cautious optimism. The children's recovery was closely monitored, with doctors and nurses working tirelessly to ensure their stability. Joseph's condition was also being carefully managed, his body recovering from the intense strain of the procedures. During this time, Joseph found solace in the small victories: Aiden's gradual improvement, Aya's steady response to treatment, and the support and encouragement from Lillian. The sight of his children slowly returning to health gave him a renewed sense of purpose. One day, as he rested in his hospital bed, Lillian brought him a photograph. It was a picture of Aiden and Aya, taken during a brief moment of calm. Both children were surrounded by medical staff, but their faces held the promise of recovery. Joseph looked at the photo, his heart swelling with hope and gratitude. "We're going to get through this," Joseph said softly, his voice full of resolve. "They're strong, just like their mother." Lillian nodded, her eyes reflecting both relief and hope. "Yes, we are, and we'll face whatever comes next together." As weeks passed, both Aiden and Aya showed remarkable progress. Their conditions stabilized, and they began to regain their strength. The family's ordeal had forged a bond of resilience and love that would guide them through the challenging days ahead. Joseph and Lillian, having faced their deepest fears and fought against overwhelming odds, emerged with a renewed sense of unity. They had navigated the darkest moments with unwavering determination, and now, as they looked towards the future, they were fortified by the strength of their shared love and the miraculous recovery of their children. In the quiet moments of recovery, Joseph and Lillian took solace in the knowledge that their fight had not been in vain. They had come together to save their family, and that enduring spirit of hope and love would be their greatest strength as they faced the road ahead. The corridor was quiet except for the soft murmur of voices and the occasional shuffle of footsteps. Lillian watched in awe as Mrs. White, a stranger yet now bound by an extraordinary act of love, knelt before Joseph. The raw emotion and sincerity in Mrs. White's words filled the space with a profound sense of gratitude and reverence. Joseph, still weakened and disoriented from the surgeries, looked at Mrs. White with a mixture of surprise and deep emotion. His eyes, heavy with exhaustion, welled up as he listened to her heartfelt expression. The enormity of her gratitude and the recognition of his sacrifice struck him deeply, resonating with his feelings of love and hope for his children. "Mrs. White," Joseph managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, "I did what any parent would do for their child. I may not have known Aya until recently, but she's my daughter and Aiden's sister. I couldn't stand by and do nothing." Mrs. White's eyes glistened with tears as she nodded. "Your courage and selflessness have given us all hope." I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. It's a reminder of the boundless capacity of a parent's love and the incredible lengths one will go to for their children. The emotional moment was punctuated by the arrival of doctors and nurses who began to update Lillian and Mrs. White on the progress of the surgeries. The details were cautiously optimistic, indicating that both children were responding well to the treatments and that the immediate crises had been managed successfully. As the medical staff continued their work, Joseph, Lillian, and Mrs. White shared a quiet moment of mutual respect and understanding. They had all faced the unimaginable, and their collective strength had brought them through. Lillian, her own emotions still raw, reached out to Mrs. White. "Thank you for your kind words and for accepting our situation with such grace. It means the world to us to know that Aya is in good hands." Mrs. White took Lillian's hand gently. "We're all in this together. Your strength and bravery have been incredible. We will continue to support each other as we move forward." With the immediate crisis behind them, the focus shifted to the recovery and future well-being of Aiden and Aya. Both families were united by a shared commitment to the children's health and happiness. They began to make plans for the days ahead, knowing that the journey was far from over, but grateful for the small victories they had achieved together. The bond forged in the crucible of their shared ordeal would shape their interactions and their hopes for the future. Joseph, despite his ongoing recovery, found solace in the knowledge that his actions had made a profound difference in the lives of his children and those who loved them. The sacrifices and struggles had not been in vain. They had created a foundation of hope and connection that would support them all as they faced the challenges yet to come. As the days turned into weeks, the healing process continued, and the relationships between the families deepened. Joseph and Lillian, along with Mrs. White and her family, worked together to ensure that Aiden and Aya received the best care and support possible. The experience had brought them together in unexpected and meaningful ways, creating a new, united front in their shared journey of healing and hope. The hospital room, once a place of trepidation and despair, was now a symbol of hope and endurance. Lillian and Mrs. White took turns by Joseph's side, their presence a comforting constant amid uncertainty. Each day, they witnessed small but significant signs of progress: a deeper breath, a stronger heartbeat, a glimmer of Joseph's old determination. Aya, despite her recovery, remained a beacon of light. She would sit by Joseph's bed, her small hand gently resting on his, offering silent encouragement. The sight of her, a reminder of what they were all fighting for, provided Joseph with a renewed sense of purpose and resolve. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the hospital window, Joseph's eyes fluttered open with a clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. He turned his head to see Lillian and Mrs. White seated beside him, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and fatigue. "How are you feeling?" Lillian asked softly, her voice betraying her anxiousness. Joseph took a deep breath, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Better. Much better. I can feel the difference. The treatment, it's working, isn't it?" Mrs. White, her eyes still red from countless tears, nodded with a hopeful smile. "Yes, Joseph, the doctors are optimistic. You've come so far, and Aya's doing well too. She's been asking about you every day." Joseph's gaze softened as he thought of his daughter. "I'm glad to hear that. How is she? Is she getting stronger?" "She is," Mrs. White said. "She's been a trooper through all of this. Her recovery is progressing well, and she's been eagerly waiting for the day she can finally see you up and about." Lillian squeezed Joseph's hand, her eyes brimming with emotion. "We're all in this together. You fought so hard, and we're not giving up now." The weeks that followed were marked by a cautious optimism. Joseph's treatment continued, each session bringing incremental improvements. The medical team monitored him closely, adjusting the therapy as needed and celebrating each milestone, no matter how small. The once bleak outlook began to brighten, and the room that had been filled with worry now echoed with tentative laughter and shared stories. Aya, who had grown stronger and more spirited each day, visited Joseph regularly. Their conversations, though often brief, were filled with warmth and affection. The bond between father and daughter, forged in adversity, was growing deeper with every interaction. One particularly poignant moment occurred when Joseph, with the assistance of a nurse, was finally able to sit up in a wheelchair. With considerable effort, he was wheeled to a common area where Aya was waiting. When she saw her father, her face lit up with a radiant smile that seemed to dispel any lingering shadows of doubt. "Hi, Aya," Joseph said, his voice weak but full of genuine affection. "Hi, Daddy," Aya replied, her voice trembling with emotion. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm so happy you're getting better. I missed you." Joseph's eyes filled with tears as he looked at his daughter. "I missed you too, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. You've been so brave." As the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in the hospital became one of recovery and resilience. The once distant hope had turned into a tangible reality. Joseph, though still amid his recovery, was beginning to show signs of his old strength. His spirits were lifted by the support of his family and the unwavering dedication of those around him. Lillian and Mrs. White continued to support each other through this journey, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They had navigated the tumultuous waters of crisis together and emerged with a newfound appreciation for the strength of family and the power of love. Finally, after months of treatment and recovery, the day came when Joseph was discharged from the hospital. He was weak but stable, and his journey was far from over, but he was going home with his family, his daughter, and his wife by his side. As they left the hospital, Joseph looked around with a profound sense of gratitude. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but the journey had reaffirmed his belief in the power of love and the strength of family. The future was uncertain, but with the support of his loved ones, he faced it with a renewed sense of hope and determination. Joseph chuckled softly, his laughter filled with newfound warmth and vitality. "I never thought I'd hear those words, but here we are," he replied, squeezing Lillian's hand. As the days grew longer and the seasons changed, the atmosphere in their home shifted from one of uncertainty to one of hope and renewal. The family's journey was far from ordinary, but their strength and resilience had forged an unbreakable bond. Mrs. White settled into her new life with grace, embracing her role as a second mother to Aya while continuing to support Joseph and Lillian. The transition was seamless, and Aya thrived in the loving environment created by both of her mothers. Their home became a place of shared experiences and mutual support, where love and laughter flourished. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the house, Joseph and Lillian sat on the porch, watching the children play in the yard. The sight of their family, united and happy, filled them with a profound sense of contentment. "You know, Lillian," Joseph said, his voice filled with emotion, "I don't think I could have made it through this without you. Your strength and love have been my anchor." Lillian turned to him, her eyes reflecting the same depth of emotion. "And you've given us all so much hope. You fought so hard for us, Joseph. You taught us the true meaning of courage and love." The two shared a quiet moment of understanding, their hands intertwined as they watched their children's laughter drift on the evening breeze. It was a peaceful scene, one that seemed to capture the essence of their journey, one of struggle, sacrifice, and ultimately triumph. Aya and Aiden, now flourishing in their recovered health, ran toward their parents, their joy infectious. "Come join us," Aya called out, her eyes sparkling with delight. Joseph and Lillian rose from the porch and walked hand in hand toward their children, their hearts swelling with gratitude and pride. As they joined in the playful frolic, Joseph felt a sense of profound fulfillment. Despite the trials they had faced, their family had emerged stronger and more connected. The road ahead was bright with promise, shaped by their shared experiences and the love that bound them together. Joseph knew that every challenge had been worth it for the chance to create a future filled with love, laughter, and togetherness. As the night settled in, the family gathered around the dinner table, sharing stories and dreams for the future. The room was filled with the sounds of happy chatter and the clinking of glasses, a testament to their journey and the new beginning they had embraced. In the end, their story was not just one of survival, but of the transformative power of love and family. It was a story that would be remembered and cherished, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope and love can light the way to a brighter future. Isn't it remarkable how life can throw us such unexpected twists, he mused. As the long-awaited day of Joseph's discharge dawned, it marked not just a conclusion but the exhilarating start of a new chapter. The hospital entrance, once a place of anxiety and uncertainty, now became a threshold to a brighter future. The entire family, now joyously augmented by the presence of Mrs. White, assembled there. Joseph, who stood proudly unaided, gazed around at each familiar face. His heart brimmed with profound gratitude and an overwhelming sense of love. "So, where are we heading now?" Aidan inquired, his voice tinged with eager anticipation and excitement. With a beaming smile, Joseph enveloped everyone in a warm, heartfelt group embrace. "Home, my dearest ones. At long last, we're all heading home," he responded, his voice filled with deep emotion. As they made their way out of the hospital and into a future that had once seemed out of reach, Joseph couldn't help but reflect on the extraordinary journey that had led them to this moment. From the solitude of a wealthy man who had disguised himself as a beggar to the profound joy of becoming a cherished family man, he had unearthed the true essence of wealth and the meaning of legacy. Standing beside Lillian, with Aidan and Aya nestled safely in his embrace, and Mrs. White completing their newly forged family unit, Joseph felt an unwavering certainty. No matter what challenges the future might bring, they would confront them together, as the family they had always been destined to become. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey today. We've explored a story of transformation, family, and the true meaning of wealth and legacy. We'd love to hear from you. What insights have you gained from Joseph's story? How might you apply these lessons to your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're eager to know one thing you've learned and how you plan to put it into practice. If you enjoyed this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, please leave your comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring stories and uplifting content. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next video.